Red Valley was the kind of place you only passed through if you had to. A forgotten stretch of desert town with a handful of neon signs that flickered more than they shined. Dust storms rolled through without warning. Stray dogs roamed the outskirts. And the only motel for 50 miles leaned so far to one side, it looked like a stiff wind might knock it over. Most travelers avoided it. Most locals pretended it didn't exist. But on one brutal night, Red Valley Motel became the center of a siege so intense it nearly erased an entire motorcycle club from the map. The men who checked into the motel that evening weren't looking for trouble. They were tired, road-worn, returning from an out-of-state meeting that hadn't gone the way they hoped. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that their presence in Red Valley would spark a chain reaction of misunderstandings, grudges, and old debts that had been waiting years for the right moment to ignite. It began quietly. A line of bikes rolling into the gravel parking lot, engines cooling beneath a red desert sunset. The motel clerk didn't ask questions. He never did. Riders were common enough along the highway, and these ones seemed calm, respectful, and worn out. They checked into 3 adjoining rooms, showered off the dust, and headed across the street to take the edge off with a few beers. But someone saw them. Someone who'd been waiting. A rival club had ties to Red Valley, small ties, unofficial ties, but enough to consider the town part of their shadow territory. And when word spread that outsiders, especially ones with a complicated history, were bedding down in their backyard, the decision was immediate. They needed to send a message. Not a war, not a massacre, just a message. But messages on the Outlaw Road have a way of spinning beyond anyone's control. The first sign something was wrong came when the bartender went quiet. His eyes darted toward the door, and at the windows, then back to the riders. The 6 men felt the tension tighten like a guitar string. Bikers know the feeling. The air gets heavy. Conversations stop making sense. You can feel danger before you see it. They set down their drinks. They stood. And as they walked out into the cooling desert night, they heard engines. Dozens of them. Headlights lined the highway like a necklace of fire. The riders crossed the street quickly, heading back into the motel parking lot. They didn't run, but they moved with purpose, scanning shadows, evaluating angles. By the time they reached their doors, the rival club had arrived, more than 20 of them, engines rumbling like distant thunder. They spread out across the lot, blocking escape routes, forming a wide semicircle. Not attacking yet, just watching, waiting. The siege had begun. Inside the motel rooms, the brothers turned off the lights and assessed what little they had. Phones didn't matter. Red Valley had no service. Weapons were limited. Exits were too obvious. And worst of all, the motel walls were thin. Too thin to survive bullets, fists, or even a determined shove. They needed a plan. Outside, the rival club wasn't rushing. They were patient. They wanted the fear to build, to soften their targets before making a move. It wasn't about killing. They didn't want that heat. It was about humiliation, dominance, repayment for old wounds. But when tensions run this hot, no one controls the outcome. Not fully. The motel clerk poked his head out just long enough to see the gathering storm before locking himself in his office. The neon vacancy sign buzzed weakly above the parking lot, and the desert wind began to rise, carrying dust and whispers across the cracked pavement. Then someone threw the first rock. It shattered a window, spraying glass across the dark motel room. The riders ducked behind the beds, grabbing whatever they could use as shields. The second rock followed instantly, then a third. The siege escalated like a fuse racing toward dynamite. The riders inside knew they couldn't stay put. The rooms were coffin small, hot and boxed in. They needed to break out, divide the attackers, create confusion. All they needed was a distraction big enough to buy 10 seconds of chaos. Just 10 seconds. And then, as if the desert itself answered them, A sandstorm rolled in. The wind roared against the motel walls. Dust blotted out the moon. Visibility dropped to a few feet. Engines revved uncertainly as bikers tried to shield their eyes. It was the moment the trapped riders were waiting for. They moved fast. One kicked open his door into the storm dust, exploding inward. Two others slipped out the window, crawling low beneath the swirling chaos. Another moved through the bathroom and out the back, sprinting between dumpsters. Hidden by the storm, they broke the siege line without the rival club even realizing it. What followed wasn't a brawl, it was a scramble for survival. Engines sputtered in the storm. Shouts were swallowed by wind. Figures moved like shadows in the orange haze. Bikes fell, boots slid. No one could see. No one could predict the next second. The riders used the confusion to regroup behind the motel, where an old maintenance shed blocked some of the storm's force. They mounted their bikes, engines coughing against the sand, and then together they made their push. They burst through the storm, headlights cutting through the dust like blades. The rival clubs scattered blinded, disoriented, unprepared for a sudden counterstrike. One bike clipped another. Two riders crashed into the gravel. A third was knocked sideways into a row of trash bins. No bullets, no knives. Just bodies, steel, instinct, and desperation. It was enough. The trapped riders tore through the line and onto the highway, tires fishtailing in the sand. Behind them, the storm swallowed everything. The motel, the rivals, the battle that had lasted nearly an hour. Within moments, Red Valley was silent again. By sunrise, the storm had passed. The motel stood crooked as ever, windows broken, dust piled knee-high against the doors. The clerk emerged to find abandoned bikes, scattered jackets, and a parking lot scarred by the night's violence. Police questioned locals. Locals said nothing. Red Valley had always been good at forgetting. To this day, no one agrees on who won the siege. Some say the rivals forced the riders out, claiming victory. Others say surviving it all counted as a win. But most bikers know the truth. There were no winners at Red Valley, only survivors. The motel was demolished 5 years later. But the legend remains. And among motorcycle clubs across the country, one thing became painfully clear after that night: territory disputes were nothing compared to what happens when desperation, fear, and pride collide in a place where no one can hear you call for help. If you want more true outlaw biker stories, more battles, more mysteries, more roads dripping with tension, make sure to subscribe. Because in our next episode, we're heading deep into the mountains to explore the disappearance of a rider whose Harley was found still running, but he was nowhere to be seen. Next time on Real Outlaw Roads, the Harley that kept running after its rider vanished.